art and activism ran hand in hand with race.
Oh, yeah.
My name is Harry Belafonte.
Oh, yeah.
I've been around for a long time, 91 years.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I have another 91 to go. Being in the film business was in itself its own kind of peculiar achievement. One of the things that did to me, and certainly to one of my closest friends, Sidney Poitier, we were the first two major personalities to step into the cinema arena at the end of the Second World War. And how we present ourselves was very important to Sidney and myself. We decided that our task would be to not just do the best we could with the platform that was offered us, but to make sure that we did not perpetuate the stereotypes that had been used by cinema so effectively and disastrously to the definition of who black people were and what they were. In my youth, every time I looked at the screen, it was with some sense of anguish, some sense of realization that how we were being perceived was not to our best interest. It's a difficult journey, and unless you're of color, you'll not truly understand the depth of what I'm saying, because it's not something you can intellectually speak of. You have to be black in order to know what the subtleties are.
That clip was from a documentary I saw on Netflix. It was made in 2018. By the time I stumbled across it to see it, it was 2021, last year. Earlier this year of 2022 was when Sidney Poitier died. Thus far, I have not heard any news about Harry Belafonte passing away. So, to my knowledge, Mr. Belafonte is still alive. At first, I was going to do a clip on Poitier shortly after his death, what his career meant to me. But then I realized I cannot talk about Poitier without talking about Belafonte. The two go hand in hand as far as I am concerned, as far as a lot of people are concerned for that matter, because it is not only their careers in entertainment, but also how they conducted themselves outside of Hollywood. I've read both of their books, The Measure of a Man by Poitier, My Song by Belafonte. By the time you finish watching this clip, you will likely think it is more about Belafonte than it is about Poitier, which I won't deny. It is why I said what I said. You can't have one of them without having the other. I feel fortunate to have been a fan during Poitier's heyday as an actor, and that is aside from Lillies in the Field. Yes, the movie he won the Academy Award for of Best Actor in a Film. That one. I saw it once in the movies when it was out. I have not seen it since. I still don't quite know how he got an Academy Award for that. I'm not saying his acting was bad or anything. He seldom gave off a bad performance from what I remember. It's just that it was not much of a movie. The plot was a flat line as far as I am concerned. You put that side by side with In the Heat of the Night, and there's like no comparison. That's all I got to say about Lillies in the Field. The thing which stood out the most for me about Poitier was the fact that he was dark-skinned. Maybe that had something to do with why I did not catch on to Belafonte until many years later. I know that might seem kind of strange hearing me say that, and admit it openly, how a person's complexion worked in his favor, and that person being darker skinned. Had he been light-skinned, it just would not have affected me the same way. When I looked at that movie screen, or TV screen, and seeing that profound blackness in all its power and glory as a little boy, I was awestruck. I was hit in the face by black power. I cannot describe it any other way. I read a book by him in the 70s called A Long Journey. I have not seen it around since. When Measure of a Man came out in the 90s or whenever it did, people were acting like it was his first book ever. I'm thinking to myself, whatever happened to A Long Journey? Suddenly it was here and suddenly it was gone? I mention it because he was honest enough to admit that after he won the Academy Award and was offered all those so-so roles in Hollywood, such as Duel at Diablo and the like, he did not have any hesitation taking them. And young boys like me rushed out to see them because he was in them. I'll bet nobody else remembers For Love of Ivy with Abbey Lincoln in the 60s or A Warm December in the 70s. I could not get enough of Sidney. I'll admit I did not see everything he made when it came out in theaters, such as In the Heat of the Night. When that came out, it was at the height of my time seeing everything Sidney. But I had only recently seen something else by him, which was not all that great, which may have been A Patch of Blue or To Sir with Love, plus the way in which In the Heat of the Night was advertised. I thought it had something to do with espionage and spies, which were not my favorite subjects at the time, so I passed on it. Years later, when I finally watched it on TV, it became far and above my best Sidney performance. When he slapped that guy in the flower garden, I like to fell out of my chair. I still get goosebumps thinking about it.
Was Mr. Colbert ever in this greenhouse, say last night, about midnight?
Gillespie?
Yeah.
You saw it.
I saw it.
Well, what are you going to do about it?
I don't know.
I'll remember that. There was a time when I could have had you shot.
I did not see him much in the 80s. I think that was when he was doing most of his work behind the camera. His last performance that I remember seeing was The Jackal with Bruce Willis and Richard Gere, in which I thought he gave a good performance. As you know, I'm heavy into listening to books on tape, which have more recently become books on disc, especially the free ones at the library. It was where I got a hold of Measure of a Man. I listened to it. He narrated it himself. That much was good. It had its moments, such as him reflecting on his time in Florida as a young man, which may have been Miami, long before he became an actor. Somehow he wandered onto the wrong side of town walking and was stopped by the cops, who told him, in no uncertain term, "Nigger, if we ever catch you on this side of town again, we are going to shoot you down," which in and of itself was bad enough. But what stuck out in my mind about it was his thoughts at the time, remarking, had they actually shot him, there would have been nothing anybody could have done about it. But that part aside, it was not much to the book overall. It in fact jumped all over the place. First he was talking about this and this part of his life. Then the next thing you knew, he was talking about that and that part of his life. All that made it hard to follow. I think I believed I would end up with something similar to what I got out of A Long Journey years before, which was a physical paperback book that I read. I bought it and I read it. I liked it. If ever I come across it again, I'll probably read some of it again, because it was good. But Measure of a Man? Maybe because it was autobiographical. Some people simply cannot put their life into perspective in a coherent fashion. Which brings me to My Song by Harry Belafonte. It was several years between getting Poitier's first from the library and then Belafonte's. Belafonte's was longer, much longer. But I gotta tell you, My Song by Harry Belafonte, that was not a book. That was a book and a half. Not only is it on my list of repeat listens, it is way up there on my list. Talk about a man who is his own man. Wow! And everything is chronological, easy to follow. The only thing I did not like about it was the narrator. He did the intro himself. Thereafter it was some other guy the rest of the way through. I don't know who that guy was, and I'm surprised Belafonte selected him. I'm certain they could have found someone better, but that is the only thing not positive about the experience. In the 80s, I was attending school in Washington, D.C. Around that same time, the big thing were protests against apartheid in South Africa. Somehow, and I don't remember exactly, I got wind of a protest march they were going to have somewhere near the Capitol. I heard of it, surprisingly, days before it happened. I decided to go, not to protest myself, but because I had heard there were going to be some well-known people in it. They were to take up their starting point at such and such a block, walk in protests for X amount of blocks, and then it would be over. Having never attended an organized protest that way, I never knew it could be done that way, starting at a certain point for a set duration, and then it would be over. So, being the starstruck guy I went there to see some of the famous people. I believe Randall Robinson was there, because he was all over the place about apartheid protests at the time. It was my only time seeing Jesse Jackson. I was surprised at how big he was. I had to look up to him. Coretta Scott King caught me staring at her, which embarrassed me. Delores Tucker was there, although at the time I had no idea who she was. Also, Tony Randall and Paul Newman. All these big-name people within arm's length of me, none of them having their own security around. When it was all over with, they all simply walked off down the street, going their separate ways. I was halfway expecting limos to drive up and they get in them. The reason I bring this up is because I can't remember exactly, but I think Harry Belafonte was there too. Because when I got home, I remember talking to my house mother, telling her about the protests and the famous people who were there. And I remember her saying about Harry Belafonte that he was the one who used his private plane to transport Mrs. King following the death of her husband. Which makes sense to me now, but back then, had he been there at the protests and I saw him, I would not have thought much of it, enough to remember him. Because at the time, all I thought he was a pretty boy who could kind of sing and kind of act. A light-skinned, pretty boy. I was all into Sidney because of his complexion. It was not until I read the autobiography of Harry Belafonte called My Song that I finally realized I had Harry pegged all wrong. He was the epitome of Black Power before there was such a thing as Black Power. Anytime you saw him and Sidney together at any sort of civil rights activity in the 60s, it was because Harry got them there together, as well as the numerous times it was only him at some events without Sidney. The man led an extraordinary life. I cannot get enough of his autobiography because he was all over the planet, doing everything. Early days in Hollywood, co-starring with Dorothy Dandriage in 2 major releases, revealing things about her I would never have known otherwise. And Sammy Davis Jr. calling him up crying on the phone for Harry to be the best man at his wedding. That rushed first marriage to the black dancer because the mob found out Sammy was messing around with a famous white actress. They told him if he did not hurry up and marry himself a black girl, they would put out a contract on his life. Sammy wanted Harry to be his best man because of everyone knowing Harry contained legitimacy. By being in the wedding, no one would believe it was rushed to avoid the danger it really was. All the way up to lots of other people, such as Mariam Makeba, Stokley Carmical, and then becoming instrumental in the Nelson Mandela U.S. tour immediately following his release from prison. Harry was deep into Pan-Africanism before anybody else was. I still am a fan of Sidney's, always will be, yet I appreciate the honesty Harry projects with his words, within Hollywood as well as without. You recall that Sidney had a very successful film trilogy in the 70s, beginning with Uptown Saturday Night, which was followed with 2 profitable sequels. Harry co-starred in only the first one. After it did well, very well, Sidney came to Harry about the follow-up. Harry admitted he did not have a taste for another, believing it would knock off some of the luster from the first. Not only did he object to doing another, he tried to talk Sidney out of it as well, which led to yet another rift between the two, which lasted for years. Whenever 2 strong-willed personalities clash, I guess that's to be expected. But still, it remains the type of Hollywood relationship I gravitate towards. Not where one guy slaps another, which continues to dominate the airwaves. I appreciate these 2 dudes. Our history is a heck of a lot richer because of them.